So, hi, my name is Mary. I'm a grade 11 student at ISP. I'm here since grade 6 already, and I have a lot of interest in the ocean degradation, more precisely, like around plastic pollution and waste. I did a lot of projects already last year around it. Like, I created my own documentary and website around it, as well as multiple like presentations. And this year, I'm actively into like taking part at the ISPEC, which is like ISP Environmental Conference, which is like happening tomorrow actually. So we're very like looking forward to that. And then in addition to that, I'm really also interested into social justice, like against like racism and discrimination. And last like main topic that I really like is like raising donations for cancer research because it's subjects that are very important to me, and I think that causes that are not enough talks about. So yeah, that's like my main interest.
Hello, I'm Douglas. I'm in grade 10 and I've been in ISP since grade 7. Uh, my main hobby right now is participating in the Sustainable Development Project of 2022-2023 to go to prepare to go to Namibia at the end of the year. We're raising funds, and eventually we aim to go to Namibia to help people in need there and build schools, build playgrounds, etc. I'm very interested in the more economic side of sustainable development. And so, um, hi, hi, Polly. Thank you for taking the time to meet us here today for an interview. And can you tell us a bit about who you are?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Douglas and Marie, for hosting me today. So I'm Polly, and I am the co-founder and co-executive director of Amala Education. And we are basically a not-for-profit, educational not-for-profit that aims to use education to transform the lives of refugees, their communities, and the world. And so I am 34 years old now, and I am British, but with a strong European in my heart, is what I always say. I guess I would identify as a social entrepreneur, having set up Amala over the last 5 years. I'm also someone that's really passionate about the potential for education making change in people's lives, especially those who have the most disadvantage, and really passionate about transforming education systems to create what I think the world needs. So yeah, that's a bit about me.
So talking about that, we wanted to know what was your passion, what sparked your interest into these ideas.
Yeah, so maybe a bit of a background. So I grew up here in the UK. I attended schools in the UK that were technically excellent schools. But I always felt that there was something missing in my education. It was very academically focused. It was very there is a focus on kind of narrowing of interests here in the UK with the A-level system. And so when I was 15, I found out about the United World Colleges, UWC group of schools, at Atlantic College, which was one of the pioneers of the IB. And I ended up getting a place at Atlantic College in Wales. And it was really there that shaped my idea around, well, that gave me the idea that education could be something different. And that a more holistic education was possible. So studying the IB diploma program, being able to kind of access such a broader variety of subject areas than I would have done in the UK system, but also kind of looking at things in a more international way, and studying things like in our English class, being able to study world literature and this kind of thing. So But beyond that, outside of my studies, being introduced to community service and being able to having an active role in leading activities. So I ran the environmental action activity on campus. I also ran a poetry society, variety of different interests. But it really I guess it radicalized me in a way, thinking like, why can't all education look like a bit more like this? After that, I went on to study. This was a bad decision in my case, but I went on to study at Oxford University, which was like exactly the opposite to everything I've described. But further, had a value in and of itself. Like that again helped me to kind of ponder these questions about like, okay, like why is this the education that everyone or that is seen as prestigious and that people are aiming for, and like what else could it be? So that's the education piece. And then I went on to work when I graduated. I went on to work. Initially, I worked in PR, in public relations. I lasted about 9 months, not very long. I was basically, I always tell people I was trying to sell sunglasses and cheese. And after a while, I thought, well, really, is this what I want to do? And then a role came up at UWC, the group of schools that I've been to, in alumni engagement, and I got that role. And so I went back into the kind of education world and still pondering these questions around like, okay, how can education make a difference in people's lives? And it was there that I was exposed to refugee education. So the UWC group of schools had an initiative, or still has an initiative, where they basically encourage, they raise funds for scholarships for refugee youth to attend the schools. And so that was one of the things that I was working on. And it was during that time that I became aware of really the like huge lack of educational opportunity for young refugees. And the fact that only a third are in secondary school, only 5% make it to university or higher education. And so thought, okay, is there something that I could do and that my partner Mia could also do? And that was where the idea of Amala came about. So our name was originally Sky School. There were a couple of reasons actually. So number one, we loved the name Sky School, but it did give the impression that we were an online school. So we were like, actually, we're not an online school. We're something a bit different to that. So there was an immediacy about it that led to some misunderstanding, but also we were threatened by being sued by Sky. Yes, Sky, Rupert Murdoch's Sky. So it took us, a while. It was really hard. It's very hard to name something. It's very hard to find a new name. But we really like this idea of that education provides hope, and especially for the young people that we're working with. And so we chose Amal, which is the word for hope in Arabic. We wanted to call ourselves Amal, but there's actually a political party called Amal in Lebanon. So we were told that was not a good idea, so we called it Amala. So it was a kind of feminization of hope, which was also really nice because we're two female co-founders as well. So very in favor of feminist leadership. So yeah, and I think it is very effective at getting across the hope that our education provides. So it's a better name for it. In my mind, there were two things. There was the desire to kind of create transformative educational experiences that kind of unleash the power of young people, but also this question of how can that also serve the young people who are least likely to have access to it. And I think with Amala, we've tried to kind of marry those two things.
How do you think studying social entrepreneurship helped you achieve your goals?
So I never formally studied social entrepreneurship, right? The other day I recorded a podcast for the OECD, who were doing some research into youth social entrepreneurship and what are the barriers. And one of the things that, I realized is that I only came across the concept of social entrepreneurship when I was at university. And it wasn't a part of my formal university studies. I did French and Italian, which was very focused on French and Italian literature. There was a centre called the Skoll Centre for Social Entrepreneurship in Oxford, and I came across the concept of social enterprises, and I started to organise conferences on the topic of social enterprise. And so I never studied it. So that's interesting because I've had to kind of teach myself basically. And I often think, wow, actually, I would have got a lot further, maybe, who knows, but I could have got a lot further today if I had actually more formally been able to study social entrepreneurship, because a lot of it has been reading books, going to conferences, etc., but not like in any formalized program way. So I think when I think about kind of how we educate for the future, like that's one of the things that I think kind of social entrepreneurship and beyond that, social innovation, being able to young people being able to have exposure to that at an earlier age, that's one of the things I think is really, really important if we want people to be social entrepreneurs, or even think that it's like a valid career track, because no one in careers advising at my school or university ever told me that was an option as well, right? So it's not just on the learning side, it's also on the advisory side.
And which challenges did you face while like creating Amala? For instance, did you encounter skeptical people because they didn't take it seriously, or other reasons like that?
Yeah, definitely. So when we came up with the idea for Amala, we were still working in our full-time jobs, and we were doing it on the side, and we were working in a cupboard most of the time. We were working in a cupboard in our former office, which had no lights. It was like this tiny cupboard, and we were having calls with people in this cupboard and saying, "What do you think about this idea?" And I think when we were at the idea stage, there were a lot of people who were very supportive, but then there were other people who were just like, "How are you going to do this?" So I think there was some skepticism, because a lot of people were like, "Okay, well, you can think of this idea, but actually doing it, that's different." And so we were like, "Okay, we actually need to stop talking about it and just do something." And so I think we saw that as soon as we had shown that we could do something, so our whole the kind of big picture idea was to be able to create a kind of alternative educational pathway for refugee youth to be able to finish their secondary education, and one that will be based on the idea of developing agency and competencies for change. And we said, okay, what's the smallest piece that we can do? We have this big idea, we want to create this diploma program, but it's going to take ages. So we just designed and ran one course. And we saw that when we had done that and we were able to show and prove and show kind of what were students saying, what were facilitators of the course saying, like that, then people were kind of less skeptical, and believed in it more because they could see evidence of it. I do think there is like this conflict in the social entrepreneurship world in general, right? Like people want easy solutions to issues, silver bullets, some people say, right? And there is no silver bullet. There is no easy solution. And so I think often in the early days, people would say to us, okay, but like this is going to be really hard to do. You're trying to be really ambitious. And in some ways that went against us. Because people would have said, oh, well, why don't you create this app that can help refugees to do? Because they think that that's maybe an easy thing to do, not that it is. And so I think our sense of ambition and wanting to create something that was bigger and demanded more development did go against us in the early days. I think also, it's all about gathering momentum, and building up from small, I think, in our case. So, how are you going to find funders? That's a big challenge for a lot of social enterprises, and that changes over time. How are you going to make it sustainable? Like that's something that is still a challenge for us 5 years on, especially kind of given the funding environment, but also the fact that I think actually the biggest challenge with social enterprises or social entrepreneurship is really trying to marry. Okay, you want to create an impact on people. And that's kind of how you're measured and what comes first. But then you also need to create some kind of sustainable business model. And a lot of the time, for us, we're working with people who can't pay for our services. The students can't pay. Their parents can't pay. So who pays? And so figuring out, I would say that it's harder as a social enterprise to figure out what that model is and how to marry the impact with sustainability. I think that's probably the hardest bit.
Yeah, I think that too actually, because I really believe that education is one of our like most valuable resource, in the sense that it helps us also construct and our path for like our life. And I think that we need more people like you that helps like the people in need, because it's very inspiring to see that, but also to see how as students, well, our ideas can really like have an impact, and meaning that we can make the difference. It's true when we say that individuals have the power to do that. And I think that it's important to help people, especially like also during the pandemic of COVID, and when we think of all the people that couldn't access education at that time, and that the need is increasing. I think it's really powerful, and it's a very nice project as well.
So, as Amala is already a pretty big organization in the world now, what do you think its impact is in society?
Yeah, it's the $1 million question, really. So I think I think how to answer it. I think that I see a lot of examples of of students who've taken our courses, because we also have courses and we have this diploma program, our programs, coming back and saying, "Oh wow, Amala exposed me to a kind of learning that I never have experienced in my life, where my opinions were taken into account, where it was based around my lived experience and how to build on that, and a belief that I am a young person that even no matter my environment, no matter the challenges that I face, I have a sense of power. I have a sense of agency. I can do something." So we have this course in social entrepreneurship, actually, where it's all about, okay, how do you develop an idea that has impact on your community? And so we look a lot at like mapping of community problems. Where are the gaps? Okay, how do you create something that might be feasible? How do you test that? How do you implement that? And a lot of students afterwards say, you know what, before that course, I thought that to be an entrepreneur or a social entrepreneur, you had to be rich. Yeah. Now I understand that I can be a social entrepreneur or an entrepreneur. And we do see quite a few examples of students going on to run or lead their own initiatives. So in Kakuma in Kenya, where we work, there are several students who've just set up a community-based organisation providing arts-based education. And that was a project that they started during their time with Amala. We have an alum in Jordan who had developed a portal that would enable refugee students to find scholarships, which he also developed on his course with Amala. So we see that kind of impact, and that's one expression of agency and positive change, right? And then I think, but I think more broadly, we also see students saying, okay, I found with Amala, I was able to find my hope again, my sense of direction. We have this whole diploma program for out of school youth. So a lot of refugees will be forced to drop out of school when they're teenagers, because maybe their parents can't afford to pay the school fees, because they're often school fees, or girls get married, often get pregnant. So our diploma provides that second chance. And so we see students going from a place where they say, I dropped out, I had no hope, there were no other educational opportunities, to, okay, now I know what I want to do next. I want to go on to higher education, or I want to go on to set up my own thing, or I want to go on to this job. So I think a lot of it is about kind of realizing, it sounds corny maybe, but like the power that they have within themselves, and being exposed to thinking about themselves in a different way, and thinking, okay, I have the raw materials to make this happen. And that's really powerful in places where there's often a lack of resources. And then I think kind of more broadly what we want to do with Amala, and there is an aspect where we want to show that this kind of learning is possible for students who are living in really challenging situations, and we want to be able to kind of influence others. We find that a lot of the time, organizations working in the context that we're working in can be very focused on the numbers game, and how many people are in the classroom and this kind of thing. But there's a drive towards quality. Okay, what does quality education look like? What does actually teaching and learning look like that is good? And so we want to be one of those examples, but also influence and say, listen, if this way of educating is possible for refugee youth, then also, I mean, a lot of people are like, well, this is relevant to anyone, which is true. um, so why shouldn't education systems be more responsive to the young people that they serve and focus on actually developing the agency and the abilities of our young people to influence the world?
And also about that, how how many schools do you have like throughout the world, and like for instance, in how many countries? And if you have any numbers of the students that already joined, Amala?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. So we've had 2,000 students participate in our programs to date. And I think it's 6 countries to date. So what we have is designed to work in a whole range of countries and contexts. So we've worked in Lebanon, we've worked in Hong Kong, we've worked in Bangladesh, we've worked in Greece. A lot of what we're doing now focuses on Kenya and Jordan. So we have our diploma program runs in those 2 locations, and we want to grow in those 2 locations. But we also want to grow it in different locations as well. So at the moment we're working on, okay, if we know that this can work in these 2 quite different contexts. So in Kenya we're working in a refugee camp that's in the north of the country, and it's basically semi-arid. It's nearly like a desert. It's very, very hot. It's very far away from a lot of things. And then in Jordan we're working in the city. So it's 2 different contexts, right? But our idea is that we want our diploma program and our changemaker courses to be able to expand to different locations as well. So we're kind of thinking, how might that work? What might that look like? And that won't involve us, Amala, always running our own programs. It will involve others running the program. So you could say a little bit like the IB in a way, working with other organizations to extend the impact.
So do you think also that because you have been in like an IB system, do you think that helped you kind of go into this path? And how did that experience kind of shape your ideas also?
Yeah, I think definitely, definitely. The IB for me, it was a liberation. Uh, it, I think, the emphasis on community service, and the fact that that was such a fundamental part of the IB has shaped my desire. And I think the desire was probably already there, but I think it increased my desire to commit to social issues. But it also was the first time that I had an opportunity to actually do something, even though it was really small. Like I spent a lot of my IB community service. I visited this older woman, Mrs. Turner, in the village, whose family was not around, didn't see her, so she saw no one. So every Tuesday afternoon I would visit her and just like literally watch TV with her, have cake, etc. But at the end of my visits, she was always so happy. So, I would come in and she'd be quite low and she hadn't seen anyone. And by the end, it was, she was so much better. And I think that was the first time that I was like, okay, like I can do something, I can I can make an impact on someone's life, right? Even if it's small. And I think that it's all about that trajectory. Like the IB started me down that trajectory. I think beyond that, beyond community service, I think, at my school there was a lot of emphasis on leadership and kind of activities that I was talking about before, and so that kind of autonomy and leadership skills that I built there were really valuable. And then through the different subject areas, as I said before, being able to kind of think critically, the emphasis on critical analysis, looking at issues through a critical lens, was really, really, really valuable. And also looking at things through being in the international school environment as well, but also the IB curriculum being so encouraging of looking at things from different cultural perspectives has been incredibly valuable to me in my work today. When I think about just like being able to operate a global remote organization with people in Kenya and Jordan and Greece and Singapore and all of these places. I think studying for the IB, but also being in an international school context, it taught me not just to think as a British person, right? Like, it taught me to think as like as a more international person. And I hadn't been in international schools before then. My family have always lived here, so I think that's been really, really valuable. So yeah, it was definitely an accelerant, I think, for me in doing what I do today.
But also talking about like cultures, do the students in Amala like learn their mother tongue, or is there like any like formalized language, for instance, French and English, or how does it work?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's a really hard question. So, so at the moment, our curriculum and our courses and our diploma is in English. That's the language we wrote because we developed it from scratch, and so yeah. But but because we work with facilitators from the local community, they will often speak. Say in Jordan, they will be speaking Arabic kind of more informally, and then in Kenya there are a whole variety of languages. English is actually the language of study in Kenya, in the Kenyan school system. So, but we do encourage people to use mother tongue. There's more we can do there, I think. I think one dilemma that we have is in Jordan, a lot of students want to learn in English because it opens up more opportunities. So there is, that conflict of English being the global language of opportunity versus, retention of mother tongue and other languages. So it's a really interesting one.
What message do you think? I mean, we're all IB students, but what message or advice do you think you could share with us for students of our age to encourage us to make a change or make an impact?
Yeah. Well, firstly, I think when I speak to anyone of your generation, I'm always like, oh my gosh, you are so much more clued in than my generation ever was. Like, the I think media has obviously changed a lot, and so there's so much more exposure to like what's going on in the world, like what are the challenges, etc., etc. So I think you already have in a way a head start. And I think it can also be really easy to be overwhelmed, right? I feel overwhelmed often when I'm like looking at the news, and sometimes I'm just like, I can't look at it, like it's too negative, right? So I think that there is a lot of like doom mongering. There's a lot of negativity. There's a lot of a sense that the world is getting worse when that isn't actually necessarily the case. But I think so. Maybe the first piece of advice is like don't be overwhelmed. Try not to be overwhelmed. But also the second thing is I think it's really important to find out like what do you care about the most, like what makes you angry even. Like for me, like the education system in my country and the structure and values of it like make me really angry. Like that's why I want to work on it. So like kind of, and I know that that's as a teenager you can feel angry about a lot of things, right? So like harness that like anger that you feel about or like passion that you feel about something, and look for ways to put it towards something. And that isn't necessarily like always going to be like setting up your own thing, because in some ways there is this idea of like to make an impact you need to set up your own business or your own charity or whatever, and that just simply isn't true, right? So there might be people doing amazing things out there already. There are people doing amazing things out there already that you could join, but it's kind of finding like what is that thing that gets you kind of like passionate or even angry, and focusing on that and thinking there's actually not like there's no one way that you're gonna solve it, right? So kind of I think for me like coming back to that idea of thinking about your mission, like okay, like if my mission is to like contribute to transforming education so that it is more inclusive, more just, and more like enabling of people, right? thinking, okay, what is your mission? I think that's a really good guide because it will help you focus on, okay, it's not just about this one thing, and then if that doesn't work out, then okay, what am I going to do? There's something wider there, right? Which is why I'm wider than my work than just Amala. It's something that I'm doing, but I might do other things as well. But also, like, that takes time, and I think the other thing is that people, I think often when I speak to, people of your age, it's kind of like there can be a pressure to do stuff now and to figure out what is your thing now. And like, I didn't realize I started Amala when I was 28, 29, right? And there were different things that came together for me, right? So that passion for education, as I was saying, but also thinking about, okay, people in disadvantage. I'm always a fan of like this Steve Jobs's calligraphy story. I don't know if you've ever heard that, but when Steve Jobs was in college, I can't remember where it was, Harvard or somewhere, he basically like dropped out of all classes, and the only thing that he kept enrolled in was a calligraphy class. And everyone was like, okay, like, why are you enrolled in this calligraphy class? And he was like, I don't know, I'm just really interested in it. And then like 10 years later, when he was designing the keyboards for Apple, that calligraphy class was really, really useful, and it came back to him, right? So like, not everything that you do is going to make sense now. In fact, like, very little probably. But if you see life as kind of like, you're kind of like building up to different things, and going with your interests and going down different tracks and figuring it out, it's kind of, that's how I've done it, really. Like, it wasn't like I had this mission from day one. Like, you're developing that mission all the time. I'm still developing it as well. So take the calligraphy class.
We just want to ask if you have any questions you would like to ask us.
Yeah, this is also a really good question. So a question might be, what are some of the ways that you are thinking about social entrepreneurship and making social change at the moment? What are some of the things that you're working on or just thinking about?
Well, talking about my project around the ocean degradation, because last year I was really into like doing a documentary. This year I wanted to bring that to another level. In the sense, I wanted to create kind of a new documentary that would explain where my passion comes from. But I also wanted to maybe advertise it more. For instance, set like a social media or something to kind of create like actual and like weekly, for instance, updated post about what I like and what I'm passionate about, because I feel like these projects are very important to me, and I love to find ways, creative ways to communicate them to people. And so I really want to do that, but also organize projects, like have that human contact with people, not only like on social media, but meet people and kind of, yeah, raise awareness about the cause, but also like share my project. And for instance, tomorrow in ISPEC, I'm really happy of like being able to like present to a national audience, like what I founded, what I want to do. And I think that's also very important to have that kind of connection with the audience and be able to make other people empowered by the cause. And so, yeah, I think that's my main project for now, but also maybe do like bake sales and other kind of ideas like that to raise like money for associations. Maybe the time that like those ideas create something bigger will bring my small contribution to like already existing organizations. And yeah.
Mm, yeah. So like increasing the platform of the thing that you've been working on
Yeah.
and bringing more visibility to it. Amazing. What about you, Douglas?
I mean, I'm participating in the SDP, and we're also doing fundraising. So instead of using money that was made by our parents or that comes from the school, we fundraise ourselves to prepare for the project. And it's really a more student initiated project rather than it's more of a teacher that gives us a template, and we are the ones that do the work. And I think it's really exciting that we're the ones that are able to make a change in the lives of many Namibian children, and that we get to experience firsthand what it's like.
Nice. And maybe also a question that you have asked me. What are some of the ways that the IB, because after all we're in the Festival of Hope, right? What are some of the ways you feel like studying for the IB and the IB program has influenced you or helped you to make social change? Because it sounds like you are both doing that.
I mean, I feel like the IB, especially in an international school, you can feel the diversity around you. There's different races, different ethnicities, and just people from all around the world. And I think that's a super cool, like, it's an opening to different opportunities. If you were in a French public school, for example, you'd be limited to seeing only France. But once you see all the diversity around you, you start thinking about the world, and especially because the IB also provides these opportunities for you to take action, make an impact.
Similar to my experience. What about you, Marie?
Well, me too. I really believe that seeing all those cultures united together really show that, well, we can be different, but that is also our strength, in the sense that, for instance, like since grade six, we've always done a lot of projects like services action, and like the school encouraged us also to put our ideas forward. And I felt like this was very important and helpful for us too. For instance, in design, we created a lot of products since our early age, kind of around a theme that was important, for instance, around the environment. And I felt like doing such project, but also like starting our own or student led, was really helping to be an incentive to develop our own afterwards. And for instance, in grade 10, so last year and for Douglas this year, like the personal project is one main project that IB requires, which I feel really helps focus on one passion we have and bring it to once again another level. It's like really focusing on one thing, but also seeing extension throughout time. And so I think that was quite insightful. And even for us in grade 11, we have a lot of theory of knowledge introduced and how we think about the world. And I think that all also like our global context and helps us rethink kind of our vision of the world. And then, I mean, also outside of the IB, when you travel and when you meet other people, you realize that opportunity you have of being in an international school and seeing that, well, from your home, basically.